You do need to keep trying different watercolor subjects in order to improve, because a good watercolor artist is a versatile one and not a bored one or a boring one. That's right, isn't it? Actually, I don't think so. In fact, there's a much gentler way to grow your skills and your confidence without constantly chasing novelty. Let me show you the secret power that can make you a happier, more confident painter, and you can start doing it today. You know, painting the same watercolor subject over and over again can have the same sort of vibe as a chore, something you feel you ought to do. You know what I mean? Stick with something until you can do it properly or right. The thing is, those are such subjective terms. It's very hard to know when you've ever actually achieved the goal. And it does feel like it's going to get boring pretty quickly. And we don't want to be so bored that it actually takes all the fun out of watercolor painting and makes us give up altogether. Speaking of which, the little project that I'm working on right now is something that I had given up on altogether, apparently. It's a handmade watercolor journal that was apparently intended for a series of watercolor flowers. It's a little project I must have started so long ago because at this point I really have little to no recollection of actually starting it. I've been making a playlist about this, so you may already know exactly what I'm talking about if you've been following along. If not, you can always catch up. I'll pop the playlist up in the cards in case you do. I do think that's a much more likely explanation of why I stopped this particular project, because one of the things that I have learned over the years is that repetition is actually not that boring at all. I've seen for myself that constraints can really make you feel a little bit more creative. Anyway, I don't really know why I gave up on this project. It is possible that maybe I decided that I got bored of flowers and wanted to paint something else and then forgot all about it. But I suspect that there are a couple of other reasons that might be a little bit more likely, perhaps something like our old friend perfectionism or something like that, which is something I discussed in previous videos in this playlist. And choosing a subject is a good example of giving yourself a constraint. It's an easy way to limit the amount of decisions that you have to make. That's more helpful than we might realize, because it's actually the sort of thing that creates enough friction to stop us from actually putting the brush to the paper when we get the idea in our heads to do some sort of painting. It's surprisingly helpful to have one less decision to make. And even if you paint the exact same flower day after day, they're most unlikely to be identical, especially if you choose to paint in watercolor, because as you probably know, watercolor offers its own unique contribution to the process every time you paint. And when you sit down to paint the same thing day after day, you do find yourself making little adjustments each time. Apart from what the watercolor is offering as variation, you'll find that you might try something different, like maybe choose a different color or alter the composition slightly. And these tiny tweaks can make a very interesting difference. It's really a great way to understand your subject a little bit better and start investigating the sort of things that make you happy about painting this particular subject. It's much easier to learn by tiny tweak than making every painting a grand undertaking that is completely new. When you repeat your subject, you benefit from the learning curve. Whenever we start something new, it's hard. That's because we don't have any skills and experience at doing this new thing. We're forging entirely new territory. But if we keep going, we start to build on what we learned the time before. Learning incrementally like this is a much gentler way to go about things. The alternative, jumping to something new every time you start a new painting, is like consigning yourself to an agony of firsts. Think of things like first days at a new job, first dates. These things can be quite tough. No need to put yourself through that every time you paint. If you stick to a subject like watercolor flowers, for example, you're working on solving a specific set of problems. Things like how to avoid muddying the vibrant pinks when you paint with green beside them, or how to show the softness of the petals, or perhaps how to make the graceful stems look natural as opposed to stiff. Every watercolor painting gives you another little piece of the puzzle, another brick in the wall, so to speak. Little by little, we find our own way of doing things. You start to develop a little bit of muscle memory, and along with it, some confidence in your own watercolor skills and techniques. So can you stick to painting the same thing forever? Of course, you're in charge. If that makes you happy, you go right ahead. There are plenty of artists who say, I'm a landscape painter or I'm a portrait painter, and just stick to that because that's what they enjoy doing. Personally, I'm a little bit of a dabbler. I like to try all the things, all the supplies, all the subjects, all the fun. So I have had to find a way to try and balance the comfort of the familiar with the challenge of doing something new. We're all different. What works for me may not work for you. To each their own. I choose to work in a series. I can't actually imagine painting any other way now. Now, it's up to you how long a particular series is. For me, I like to say a series is 10 paintings. Or if you have a themed sketchbook like the one I'm currently working in, it could be that the series lasts long enough to fill all the pages. I must say that this does mean that I have a vast array of sketchbooks because I very often have a new idea for a sketchbook series and I love shopping for sketchbooks and starting them. So one of the ideas that I'm trying to embrace is that it's perfectly all right to change your mind about a series halfway through a sketchbook. It's a little reminder that we set our own rules here. And I think it's a lot better to change your parameters than abandon the project completely. That does seem a shame. The project I'm working on right now is a great example of that. It's been such fun to come back to and continue working in. So I don't think that we need to have fixed ideas about the time frames for completing our series or the little rules that we might have set for ourselves. We can reserve the right to change our mind at any point. So when I'm not working in a sketchbook, my rule of thumb is that 10 paintings makes a series. And I like to create a new series every single month. I actually do it along with the members of my Happy Painters Hub. I'll pop the links in the description in case that's something you'd like to find out more about. I find that a month is the perfect length of time to get to know my subject, play around with ideas for that subject in my sketchbook, and create a cohesive set of paintings based on that subject. I find it's very satisfying to work this way. And then when the month is over, it's time for a fresh new challenge of a new subject. Of course, no matter what you're painting, there will be a set of core skills that are going to carry forward into every other painting that you do. I'm talking about things that are common to all paintings. Things like brush and paint control, getting your values right, learning about composition. But applying those to a particular subject is always its own fresh little challenge. It's a way of understanding those principles better and better each time. I think you do need to give yourself enough time to explore each particular subject. I do think that we all know quite intuitively when it's time to paint something new. But that's quite different from forcing yourself to take on something new because you think you have to. You don't have to keep abandoning your subject to keep learning. So the next time you feel like you ought to be switching subjects because you're supposed to push yourself out of your comfort zone and make sure you try something new, please remember that there is so much freedom and growth available in repetition of the same subject. Sometimes the most creative thing you can do is paint the same flower just one more time. If you're enjoying this idea of painting in a series, I've got another video that's all about that. In fact, I've painted over 82 series so far. And in the video that I'm talking about, which I'm going to pop up on the screen, I'm sharing 3 of the most valuable things I've learned from painting this significant number of separate watercolor series. As I said, I've popped it up on the screen so you could watch that one next. Happy painting!